This is Jonathan Potter at Eastern Washington University, and I'm presenting a paper today entitled A Tetradic History of eText, applying Marshall McLuhan's Tetrad to text-oriented electronic media. Marshall McLuhan's Tetrad, a simple but powerfully insightful rubric for analyzing the effects of a given medium or technology, was most fully developed in his posthumous Laws of Media, 1988, co-authored with his son Eric McLuhan. With the Tetrad, which ties into and consolidates much of McLuhan's earlier thinking about media and their effects, McLuhan predicts that any medium or technology can be observed to simultaneously enhance a human capability or sensory organ, obsolesce or outmode another medium, retrieve or recover an already obsolesced medium, and reverse or transform, or as I prefer, flip into something else when pushed to the extreme. This paper, which constitutes the first part of a larger study, applies the Tetrad in an historical, analytic mode to several early text-oriented electronic media, ranging from the electric telegraph to email, with the aim of better understanding how eText has evolved and where it might be headed. The telegraph, 1844. It enhances communication at a distance. It obsolesces 19th century overland and overseas communication delivery services, such as the Pony Express, the stagecoach, railroad, steamer, and sailing ship, as well as earlier forms of visual telegraphy, most notably the semaphore line, utilized in France and elsewhere in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It retrieves the village globally and creates the Victorian Internet. It flips into the telephone, from literacy to post-literate orality. Marshall McLuhan liked to point out that the appearance of the first commercial electric telegraph in 1844 coincided with the publication of Kierkegaard's The Concept of Anxiety. McLuhan saw a connection between Kierkegaard's apprehension of inward worldwide anxiety with the outward, impending, potentially global connective apparatus of the telegraph. The transformative effect of the telegraph, as Tom Standage's book-length study, The Victorian Internet, outlines in marvelous detail, was as profound as and can be seen as a precursor to the Internet. Great distances that had always, in real time at least, separated humanity's enclaves across the planet were suddenly reduced, at least in terms of text-based communications, and at least potentially, to essentially nothing, no time, or mere seconds or minutes as opposed to long days, weeks, months, or even years that had previously characterized global communications. Thus, the global village, and hence the anxiety, the terror of the tribe. Why anxiety and terror? Because the imploded world created by the telegraph and subsequent networked electronic media created a sudden shift from the fixed point of view and perhaps more importantly, the cool detached time frame of the alphabetic and especially the typographic person, to the high heat, in-your-face, freewheeling present tense dynamism of the village. Landers writ large, as McLuhan said. Next, let's consider the bulletin board system, or BBS, which appeared on the scene in 1978. The BBS enhances community awareness, the exchange of messages and announcements. It obsolesces the physical bulletin board at the grocery store or someplace like that. It retrieves the living room. It flips into the internet, Gopher, if you remember Gopher, Usenet, and finally the World Wide Web as we all know it today. I vividly recall the first time I dialed up and connected to a BBS. It was 1988. I was fresh out of college, living in Seattle, and had only recently purchased my first computer, a generic IBM-compatible PC. The computer didn't even have a hard drive, just two 5¼ inch floppies, but it had 2 or 3 expansion slots, and into one of those I had plugged a 1200 baud modem, attached a phone line to it, and dialed up a local number I had found listed in a free local publication called the Puget Sound Computer User. A decade earlier, in 1978, Ward Christensen and Randy Seuss had hacked together the first BBS during a snowstorm in Chicago. The technology proliferated among the microcomputer geek hobbyist set, and by the time I plugged in my modem in 1988, thousands of amateur hubs existed throughout the United States. These islands of high-intensity interaction operated under the radar of mainstream society, in the dark as it were, created, in McLuhan's terms, a milieu that was ripe for flipping over into what subsequently became the web and swallowed up the whole world. Among the BBSs listed in the computer user were evocative names such as Max Revenge, Sudden Impact, The Ice House, Caves of Chaos, The Night Shift, and Underworld. I was living in a house shared with several other recent college grads, and I didn't want to tie up the phone line when others might want to use it, so I had waited until after midnight to hook up the modem. I set up my computer in the basement where I could hook up to a phone jack and loaded the floppy with the term, short for terminal, software that would facilitate the connection. One of my housemates, a night owl like me, had the TV on and was looking on curiously. There was a thrill in the air, a powerful feeling that I would momentarily be plugging in and turning on, tapping into a mysterious and potentially wonderful clandestine electronic community. I typed in the phone number and punched the enter key. No mouse clicks back then, just DOS-based key commands. And then I heard, for the first time, the characteristic hiss and shriek, like the sound a cat makes when you step on its tail, of the modem connecting. Shazam! Here in my basement, in the middle of the night, my computer was suddenly connected to some other more powerful computer across town somewhere. I was networked. Suddenly, text, e-text, was scrolling across my screen, welcoming me to the BBS, offering a menu of further documents and forum areas. Fantastic. There were dozens of these BBSs listed in the computer user, and I spent much of the night dialing up and checking them out. After that, many a night found me dialing up and logging in until the wee hours of the morning, and it was all in an environment rich with the nascent medium of e-text. Next, consider the numeric pager, which appeared around 1980. The pager enhances hailing another person at a distance. It obsolesces the answering service. It retrieves the elaborate bird call-styled coded whistle used by amateur spies and others, and the dinner bell. It flips into the cell phone and text messaging. The pager has an interesting history that is not entirely text-based, but overlaps into our sphere of e-text significantly enough to merit inclusion in this inventory. The first pagers were marketed to on-call medical personnel in the 1950s and were strictly voice-based. The first numeric display pagers were introduced in 1980. a callback number or coded numeric message input by the caller would appear on a small LCD screen on the pager. In 1986, Motorola introduced the Bravo numeric pager, which became the world's best seller. At this point, and well into the 1990s, the technology began to be more widely adopted across a broad spectrum of the population. The words of Anna Jane Grossman are relevant here. She said, "Pagers were an equal opportunity technology owned by drug dealers, whores, doctors, and CEOs, as well as new college students whose parents couldn't drop the leash." Grossman recalls how she and her college friend Sarah, who also owned a pager, would send each other coded messages. "Some of our codes were super private, so I can't share them," she said. "But others were standard, 411 for information, 911 for emergency, 143 to symbolize the number of letters in each word of the phrase, 'I love you.'" Other combinations of numbers could actually serve as direct visual substitutes for alphabetic letters. For example, 07734, when you turned the pager display upside down, could be read as a friendly little missive, "Hello." Any element of interactivity in these communications would of course have to be mediated by a telephone with a keypad. Thus, the cell phone, with its advanced texting capabilities, rapidly obsolesced the pager. Sending quick private messages became a lot easier, and perhaps a lot less fun. The cell phone did not entirely kill the pager, however. As is often the case with obsolete technologies, niche markets and special uses remain. As Ken Peterson outlines in his Defunct Devices website, pager technology persists as a useful alternative or adjunct to cell phone technology in venues such as restaurants to alert diners when a table is available, emergency and security systems when cell phone bands get jammed or lack the requisite security capabilities, and many other specialized situations where the humble, outmoded device can step in and do the job. Finally, let's consider email, which came onto the scene, at least commercially, in a widespread way in about 1993. Email enhances personal and/or business communication. It obsolesces snail mail, and derisively coins the term snail mail even as it does so. It retrieves passing notes to nearby classmates in real time, as in the third grade. And it flips into that horrible stuff we all loathe, namely spam, or junk mail, information overload. Oh, email, how brightly you once shone, how fun and novel you once were. In 1971, Ray Tomlinson gave you your characteristic @ sign, connecting a username with a computer name. But you didn't really take off until the 1990s when you blossomed with the internet. In 1993, the large network service providers America Online and Delphi started to connect their proprietary email systems to the internet, beginning the large-scale adoption of internet email as the global standard. You were like a fresh breeze on the electronic spring air. In earlier times, I had written many tangible, smellable even in their pulpy reality, pen-on-paper letters to far-flung friends, and I saved theirs back to me in shoeboxes. But when you dawned, O email, my posting of folded paper missives, snug in their addressed and stamped envelopes, gradually trickled down to an empty, dry, paperless riverbed where once the paper-white waters flowed and churned. Behold what email hath wrought. Instead, I followed your cursor to my bliss and sent instant communications with abandon to my electronically with it friends. Those paper-bound laggards with whom I once corresponded and who now eschewed plunging into your rapids, alas, got left on the paper-strewn shore. What joy those early email exchanges brought. And yes, Marshall, what terror, too, in their implosive transformation of time and space, bringing me back to the third-grade classroom and those surreptitiously passed notes, those nuggets of instant secret information in real time. And yet now, disembodied and floating there in the backlit glow of a luminous screen, for quite some time your glow persisted, but gradually your light merged into the mundane, steamy mist of information overload and unending spam, alas. E-books, tablets, and beyond. The foregoing is a first sample of a more comprehensive tetradic history of e-text planned as a chapter in my book-length study, Text and E-Text, the Changing Media Environment for Readers, Writers, Librarians, and Publishers. The 4 early examples of e-text thus far considered point to some preliminary conclusions for an overarching understanding of the ramifications of the electronic environment as it pertains to the human experience of text-oriented media. In the 4 cases considered above, the underlying medium of text forms the content, at least in part, of the given electronic medium, and is fairly rapidly pushed to the extreme by the electronic environment in which it is situated. The telegraph flips to the telephone, and the whole world flips with it from literacy to the new orality. BBS flips to www and infuses the whole world with geek culture. The pager flips to texting and recovers an idiosyncratic post-literate literacy for the telephone. Email flips to spam and information overload, highlighting the overarching problem of managing the flow of information in our lives. The overarching concern for text in the electronic environment is whether the achieved value, as McLuhan phrased it, of 500 years of print culture can be preserved within the overheated electronic milieu. The Internet and all that is entangled in its vibrating strands is rife with text, but so many other media are intermingled with text that literacy as we have known it since Gutenberg may well be endangered. Within the Internet media environment, the human person seems to increasingly find herself in a distracted, attention-deficient state that is at odds with the immersive, contemplative reading experience that characterizes literacy at its best. Increasing awareness of this in books like The Shallows by Nicholas Carr and Hamlet's Blackberry by William Powers may point to a backlash or larger scale flip by our culture whereby the best of print culture is recovered within the dynamic spirit of electronic culture. The question will play out in many facets of our culture, but a key place to watch that playing out is in the realm of e-books and tablets. There's no question about who has led the current revolution in e-books and e-readers. It is undoubtedly Jeff Bezos and Amazon. There is also no doubt that the writing is on the wall. Print books are on their way out as the driving force they once were. But the question is, will the dedicated e-reader, such as the original Kindle and the Nook, persist as a device that encourages the immersive best of old-school literacy? Or, by contrast, will the Kindle and other dedicated reading devices be eclipsed in due course by the iPad, the the Kindle Fire and other multimedia tablet devices that allow for a quality e-reading experience, to be sure, but also encourage distraction upon distraction. It will be interesting to watch and read all about how this plays out in the coming years and decades. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for tuning in, and feel free to email me, jpotter@ewu.edu, if you'd like to follow up on this with questions or comments.